Good morning. The United States federal government has entered a partial shutdown. The midnight deadline for funding passed without an agreement in Congress, shuttering a range of federal agencies and services. The immediate cause was a deadlock in the Senate, where Democrats blocked a short-term spending bill that had been passed by the House of Representatives. That bill, known as a continuing resolution, would have extended government funding at current levels until November 21st, giving lawmakers more time to negotiate a full-year budget. However, the path to a simple extension was complicated by a fierce partisan battle, primarily centered on health care. Democrats, who said they were sidelined in negotiations, had pushed to include an extension of enhanced subsidies for health insurance under the Affordable Care Act. Those subsidies, which were expanded during the pandemic, are set to expire at the end of this year. Democrats warned that without action, millions of Americans would see their insurance premiums skyrocket, with an average increase of 114%. But Republican leaders and the White House framed the Democratic demands differently. They accused their counterparts of risking a shutdown to restore what they called illegal immigrant health care. President Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and House Speaker Mike Johnson all argued that Democrats were attempting to roll back key provisions of President Trump's signature legislative achievement, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA. That law, passed earlier this year, included reforms aimed at limiting Medicaid eligibility to U.S. citizens and certain lawful permanent residents. It also penalizes states that use their own funds to provide health care to undocumented immigrants by reducing the federal government's matching funds for their Medicaid programs. Those provisions are scheduled to take effect today, October 1st. Speaking to reporters, President Trump laid the blame squarely on Democrats. He said, quote, "They want to have illegal aliens come into our country and get massive health care at the cost to everybody else. And we don't have it. And that's, I would say, the number one reason that they want to strike." Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer rejected that claim, calling it one of the big lies from Republicans and insisting that undocumented people would not receive the credits. He said Democrats were ready to find a bipartisan solution. Quote, "Democrats did not want to shut down. We stand ready to work with Republicans to find a bipartisan compromise. And the ball is in their court." In the days leading up to the deadline, President Trump warned that a lot of federal workers could be laid off, and that during a shutdown, his administration could take actions that are, quote, "irreversible," such as cutting programs favored by Democrats. Senator Schumer seized on those comments, accusing the president of admitting he is using Americans as political pawns. With the shutdown now in effect, the Office of Management and Budget has directed federal agencies to execute their plans for an orderly closure. The human and economic costs are significant. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that around 750,000 federal employees could be furloughed each day, at a daily cost of roughly $400 million in compensation. Many essential employees, including active-duty military personnel, will be required to work without pay until the shutdown ends. Furthermore, the OMB has warned of potential mass layoffs, a more permanent step than the temporary furloughs seen in past shutdowns. For the public, services will be curtailed. The Capitol Visitor Center, the U.S. Botanic Garden, and the Library of Congress are all closed to visitors starting today. While the political branches of government are locked in this standoff, the judicial branch has delivered a sharp rebuke to the Trump administration over its actions concerning free speech on college campuses. A federal judge in Boston has ruled that the administration unconstitutionally violated the First Amendment rights of pro-Palestinian protesters and academics. U.S. District Judge William Young, an appointee of President Ronald Reagan, issued a blistering 161-page order following a 2-week trial. Judge Young found by clear and convincing evidence that top administration officials, specifically naming Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, deliberately coordinated their department's actions. The judge wrote that their goal was not to deport all pro-Palestinian non-citizens, but to pursue a more insidious strategy. He concluded the administration's intent was to target a few for speaking out, and then use the full force of immigration law to publicly deport them. The ruling stated this was designed to suppress pro-Palestinian student protests and to terrorize other non-citizens with similar views into silence. The case was brought by the American Association of University Professors and the Middle East Studies Association, who represented faculty and protesters, including individuals named in the case like Mahmoud Khalil and Rumeysa Ozturk. In his decision, Judge Young lambasted President Trump directly, calling him a bully who is fixated on hollow bragging and retribution, particularly on issues of speech. The judge wrote, quote, "Government retribution for speech, precisely what has happened here, is directly forbidden by the First Amendment." He added that the president's palpable misunderstanding of this core principle poses a great threat to Americans' freedom of speech. The administration is also testing the boundaries of federal law in the realm of education and civil rights. The Departments of Education and Health and Human Services have issued a formal ultimatum to the state of Minnesota. The administration has accused Minnesota of violating Title IX, the federal law that prohibits sex-based discrimination in education programs. The alleged violation stems from the state's policy of allowing transgender athletes who were assigned male at birth to compete in girls' sports. On September 30th, the federal government issued a notice of violation to the state, its Department of Education, and the Minnesota State High School League. They have been given a 10-day deadline to comply with the administration's interpretation of Title IX. If Minnesota fails to do so, the matter could be referred to the Department of Justice for legal action. The federal notice alleges that over several years, Minnesota has allowed male athletes identifying as transgender to compete on girls' teams in sports, including skiing, lacrosse, track and field, volleyball, and fast-pitch softball. The notice also states that these athletes were allowed to occupy female-only spaces. This action sets the stage for a potential legal clash between the federal government and the state over the rights of transgender students and the modern application of Title IX.